After the incredible misfire that was Starrcade 1998, even though the fans exploded when Kevin Nash ended the undefeated streak of Bill Goldberg, bringing an end to the 173-0 winning streak and saying, that's it, I'm putting a 1 on this son of a bitch, I'm going to take the world title to new heights, and oh, what's that? We're going to have the finger poke of doom just a few days later. That was a great idea. Way to piss off about 41,000 fans in the Georgia Dome when you were against a taped Raw. Check out my retro reviews of those particular episodes, Nitro and Raw. My oh my, WCW certainly had a chance to turn things around, and did they? Well, yes, they turned around 360 degrees and kept smashing into the goddamn wall. I can't figure out why this company was out of business just over 2 years after this event. But nevertheless, I'm John Renton with the retro review of WCW Sold Out 1999. Oh, where to fucking start with this goddamn thing? Look, they focused more on in-ring action, and yeah, they had the NWO all over the semi-main. And I get what they were going for, and this did lead to actually an increase in pay-per-view buys for Super Brawl 9. And actually, Uncensored 99 did pretty decent. Then you had Spring Stampede 1999. That was actually arguably and pretty much the best pay-per-view that WCW put on in 99. Then things just went downhill very, very, very fast. It's actually shocking that WCW had the wrestling world by the balls, by the tank, tickle and all that stuff, and just taking wrestling higher and higher and higher. But Bischoff and Co. didn't know what the fuck they were doing. In retrospect, they did not. Sure, you had the turnover rate with everybody at Turner Broadcasting. And I'm not saying that wasn't a factor, but I love Bischoff as an on-screen performer. He had a lot of really good ideas, lucked into some things, and had things cooking. And there were a lot of big contracts and a lot of great shit going. And if they kept selling out arenas, they would do great. If they kept doing 300 to 350,000 pay-per-view buys every single show, they'd be doing great. They weren't doing that by the time they got to mid-99, and things were rapidly eroding. But they were at the Charleston Civic Center in Charleston, West Virginia. 10,800 or so fans. 330,000 pay-per-view buys. That was down from Starrcade 98's 460,000 pay-per-view buys, but that's understandable because Starrcade, big premiere event. Even though Starrcade 95, I think, had like under 100,000 pay-per-view buys, which is shocking considering that actually wasn't that bad in comparison to 1994. And Super Brawl 9 did do 485,000 pay-per-view buys just about a month later, which is absolutely flooringly shocking. I still can't believe that card got that. But nevertheless, to talk about previous, WCW sold out events, even though it was NWO sold out in 97, WCW NWO sold out in 98, and for this one, and then WCW sold out in 2000. There was no turning back at this point, and boy, wasn't that appropriate given the state of WCW at this point. They still had plenty of talent, a lot of talent. The thing is, and I'm going to say right now before I really dive into the facts and figures of the previous events and this one and just talk about all that in a little more detail, WCW really did have a chance, but they didn't elevate enough talent. Sure, the cruiserweights were doing some great shit. You can see on this event how even the fans were getting tired of some of the cruiserweight stuff. They were popping for some of it. They weren't evolving. Booker T was not involved on this, and Booker T should have been pushed into the semi-main event picture well before he was. And Hogan was on this, Nash was on this, but not in a wrestling capacity. Sting was out because of his sabbatical. He was getting saved, trading one addiction for another, but whatever. Sting is still wrestling to this very day as of this recording. We are up closing in on AEW Revolution in his last ever match that probably is going to end up being a disaster. At least I hope it won't be, but it's against the Bucks. But no Bret Hart. Ric Flair was in basically a gimmick match. They had people still going, but they didn't have Savage on this. Savage had appeared at Starrcade 98. If I remember, actually, was it Starrcade 98? No, it was actually the Nitro where Flair beat Bischoff. They were doing some good stuff even with, the stars being gone. And yeah, they had a certain limited number of dates. I mean, but still, all the wrestlers they had on their goddamn roster. And they had all the resources. They didn't have the know-how. It will forever annoy me that WCW did not do things better. So, let's get to the facts and figures, all the rest of the stuff, and then dive into some detail on this particular pay-per-view. I will say right now, this pay-per-view was not very good, but that means that 1997 NWO Sold Out, widely regarded as one of the worst WCW pay-per-views, especially of that time. But they were in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Why they thought it was a good idea to do... Why they thought it was a good idea to have them ride around dump trucks and about minus 20 degree wind chill. Didn't look good. The arena had about 9,000 seat capacity, and they had around 5,000 or so fans. And you know what? For the staging and for all the stuff that they had, whatever. I mean, it was what it was. 170,000 pay-per-view buys. It was down from Starrcade's 345,000 pay-per-view buys, but it was experimental, and that experiment failed. It had a cool look. The Miss NWO contest went on way too long. You can check out my retro review of that I did a while ago. And it was down from Super Bowl 7's 275,000 pay-per-view buys just about a month later. Then we go to 1998, Dayton, Ohio, 5,500 seat capacity, way down from Starrcade 97, that I think was in the NCI Center and had around 17,000, 18,000 people. I think Shivani at one point said 24,000 people. I don't think that venue has 24,000 seats, but nevertheless, they pretty much had a legit sellout. I think it was just under 5,500 people, so sold slap dab out. Good stuff. 380,000 pay-per-view buys, way down from Starrcade, 700,000 pay-per-view buys, the most bought WCW pay-per-view, but compared to 1997, they went with WCW, NWO, and that certainly helped. And they were carrying over from Starrcade 97, even though they fucked up all the stuff with Sting, and should have had him just beat Hogan clean, but that doesn't work for him, brother. He isn't tan enough. Super Bowl 8 had 415,000 pay-per-view buys, so really, they were kind of right there, sandwiched, in a pretty good spot. But then we go to 2000. That was in Cincinnati, Ohio. The venue apparently had 17,000 seat capacity, and they sold around 14,132 tickets. Or at least that was the number of fans. They probably papered the thing, but you know what? In 2000, for them to have 14,000 people in an arena, when that company was more than spiraling out of control, the whole Vince Russo, all that stuff and everything, you can check out my retro reviews of the 2000 pay-per-views and the entire timeline from the reboot episode on April 10th, 2000, all the way to the very end. You can watch me slowly lose my goddamn mind and then rapidly lose my mind. They had 115,000 pay-per-view buys, and that was down from 145,000 for Starrcade 99. There was another retro review I did where I pretty much just ripped apart everything about it, and it was up from the 70,000 the Super Bowl 10 did. They would only hit 100,000 pay-per-view buys one more time. That was for Bash at the Beach 2000, where Vince didn't want to play politics with Hulk Hogan. Vince Russo, that is. I should just say Russo, because Russo doesn't even deserve to have the name Vince, applied to him when it comes to professional wrestling. Because there's only one proper Vince in wrestling. That was McMahon. For all his faults and all the bullshit that he did, he at least, he contributed positively to wrestling. So, we now go to the proper pay-per-view with Ric Flair as as the president of WCW. And World Championship Wrestling is back. We're unified. We are ready to go forward, and they did, into a goddamn ravine. Ric Flair eventually, and pretty quickly actually snapping and wanting to become president for life and all that stuff. Yeah, I don't know why they decided to turn Flair into a heel, even though Flair was always a better heel. They could have ran with him as a face a bit longer. But WCW, pyro, and lots of signs in the crowd. That's one thing I'll say. One thing I noticed is they had a loud crowd. That 10,000 people, they really did have things rolling. I mean, and I think the building, if I remember right, was around 14,000, 15,000 people, which is pretty good. Pretty damn good. They had a big old amount of big old amount of signs. Crowd was up. Shivani, Heenan, and Mike Tenay running down the card, giving us a rundown of all the events, with a few clips and everything. Talking about David Flair's pay-per-view debut, Scott Hall and Goldberg in a ladder match, and the other stuff going on. And then we cut to the back. Goldberg is yelling and holding his knee. Why? And I asked why with the first match. One, renowned murderer Chris Benoit. You can defend him all you fucking want, but he did murder his wife and child, and that cannot be forgiven. Now, sure, he could do a hell of a German suplex. He could do a lot of stuff, and if you can watch his matches and have the ability to put that to the side, great. It is still hard for me to do that. I mean, a lot of fucked up people in professional wrestling. A lot. And he was more than fucked up. But there are a lot of people, I think, that excuse that behavior, and I don't understand. Chris Benoit took on Mike Enos. Nothing against Mike Enos, who apparently retired about 15, 16 months after this, sometime in 2000. But one of the Beverly Brothers, who thought it was a good idea for him to get 11 minutes on pay-per-view. Had this been 7 minutes and had they maybe cut a couple matches down, had they had a couple more titles defended, there were some matches that had no business going as long as they did. Same with Starrcade 98. Look at the rundown of the time. Go to, any reputable wrestling website. Go to Cage Match, go wherever, go to Wiki, go to WrestleNomics. Check out this stuff. Check out the rundown and the runtime of these matches. This went 11 minutes and should have gone maybe 6. And Mike Enos, look, he got some good shots in, but it went way too long. One, there was a diving headbutt. Benoit was selling it, probably because he was rattling what was left of his goddamn attached brain. Mike Enos then tries to come back with kind of a clothesline, sort of. I don't know why they went with that instead of Benoit just saying, to hell with it, elbow him in the back and hit the crossface. He got the crossface and won. It was not a good opener. It would have been better if it was cut down by at least a third. And we get a package on Goldberg and Scott Hall. Again, who thought Mike Enos should get a pay-per-view match, especially a singles pay-per-view match in 1999? Norman Smiley, by the way, has a urn full of wood chips and sawdust because he ground Chavo Guerrero's wooden horse Pepe, or, Pee-Pee or whatever. This storyline was Pee-Pee, I'll tell you that much, to show just how mature I am. And it was an old urn. An old urn that was like from the 16th century. I mean, dear God, were Dracula's ashes in that. Norman Smiley and Chavo Guerrero Jr., they are fighting over, a chipped wood horse. They are fighting over shampoo. I love Norman Smiley. Chavo is good when, he's in there with a good opponent. Who said this should go 16 pissing minutes? 10, maybe. And 10 might have even been stretching it. Because Chavo just wasn't that interesting, and people pop for Norman's big wiggle. That's not a euphemism, but it could be, and probably would be if you don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. The crowd was into Norman. This went forever. Heenan even had to make jokes about Mrs. Guerrero's chili, and that was the reason for Rolaids being invented. Because Heenan at this point didn't give a fuck, and I can't blame him. The chicken wing eventually won it after some sawdust went in Chavo's eyes. And this was dreadful because it went, again, 16 fucking minutes. And then they have the WCW.com stuff with Lee Marshall and Mark Madden. Who the fuck would want to talk to Mark Madden unless they were being held at gunpoint? A noted piece of shit, a noted guy that wanted to interrupt a wrestling charity event and get money, allegedly, covering my ass here. And a guy that contributed nothing positive to wrestling commentary. So, yeah, Conan was being talked to. That would be coming up a little bit later. Fit Finlay took on heavy metal hippie Van Hammer on pay-per-view. Nothing against Van Hammer, who, I liked the guitar stuff and everything when I was a kid. I was also 10 and 11 when that shit happened. Commentary was talking about how Hogan is not going to be wrestling on this. Hogan is the current world champion. Good job there. Good job. Putting your belt on somebody that was a draw at one point and maybe sells merch, but putting the title on somebody that doesn't wrestle more than a handful of times a year. It's a good thing no wrestling company is doing that now. This was dreadful. Van Hammer is a fine athlete, but he was never a good singles wrestler. And hadn't really had a good match since he took on Cactus Jack in 91, I want to say. I think it was a November Clash of Champions. Help me. I'm struggling. I'm trying to remember. This is brutal. The commentary didn't care. The crowd didn't care. There was a tombstone, 1, 2, 3. This went almost 10 minutes. These matches are going way too long. I know that people complain about the Russo slamming, together of all these pay-per-view matches and having more and more pay-per-view matches and some not going more than 3 or 4 minutes. But there are times where short pay-per-view matches might not be the worst thing in the world. Again, Fit Finlay, great athlete, Man Hammer, big guy, but almost 10 minutes on pay-per-view, please. Bam Bam Bigelow took on Wrath. Not the only time that we will see Bam Bam on this pay-per-view. The crowd at least woke up for these two big guys coming together, and oh boy, a Chinlock, Wrestling Bios, is going absolutely nuts. Wrestling Bios has been doing great stuff with the Reliving the War, the series that they've been doing, and the various deep dives and stuff like that. Great work by those guys. Really, I mean that. I fucking love listening to their stuff. And if I had the budget, I'd include clips and everything, but I wouldn't want to get the copyright strike against me. So, yeah, Wrath hit a few decent moves, but this also went almost 10 minutes, and Greeting from Ass-Buried Park, I think that's what it's called, Bam Bam gets the victory. Sadly, Bam Bam would not really be getting that many high-profile victories by the end of 99, and it would just unfortunately get worse and worse for Bam Bam. Rest in peace, Bam Bam Bigelow. Conan then comes out, mentioning that people need to toss his salad and peel his potatoes. Why is he so obsessed with that stuff? These are important questions. I don't really think I need to know the answer. Conan took on Luger. Look, the crowd was very, very up for this. Luger got a lot of pyro. Luger wanted to cut a promo saying, "Walk away or I will beat your ass." Conan fires up, jumpstart, crowd's into it. Luger slows it down. This actually, sadly, was the best thing on the show so far. That's not saying much, but it was the best thing on the show. Unfortunately, then it got a little bit messy because we got attacks on the neck, on the shoulder to stop the Tequila Sunrise, and also to set up for the torture smack. Don't worry, smack is something that Luger decided to indulge in, allegedly, covering my ass here. Then Liz shows up, looking ever so gorgeous, ever so fucking gorgeous, and either maces Conan, sprays him with black face paint that doesn't cover him, who knows, and then the torture rack gets the victory. Luger beats him up a little bit more and leaves, and Conan has to be carried out by officials. Okay, that was a bit of a flat finish, but getting a facial from Liz, I would have. Let's move on from that. So we get Perry Saturn and Chris Jericho. Loser wears a dress match. Look, this has been done since the territory days. Various things like that, it's a way to really, really get, either anger towards the heel or cheers from the face when the heel's got to wear it. You had the Midnight Express, Bill Watts and JYD, or Stagger Lee, because JYD was out of the territory, so he had to wear a mask and do all this stuff, and it led to a lot of business with Cornette having to wear his mother's dress or other things. And it was a way to humiliate people. And that worked. And you have referee Scott Dickinson, who has issues with Saturn. And Jericho basically said, "You're the official. You need to be treated with respect." This was talked about on the Finger Poke of Doom episode of Nitro. Once again, Nitro Raw reviews from those particular, or that particular day. Check out those retro reviews if you want for a little bit of context on the storyline here. They've been feuding for a bit. Saturn was pretty fired up here, but according to Kevin Sullivan, couldn't connect with the fans. Kevin Sullivan, a man that can't even get on most carnival rides and probably shouldn't be legally allowed around children. I'm really stretching here. Probably shouldn't say that. But that being said, Ralphus has a dress ready. We get a splash for 2. And then we get an inadvertent bump where Scott Dickinson, who had been calling it right down the middle here, maybe got upset with Jericho, taking advantage of him, but was like, okay, you know what? I've had my issues with Saturn, it is what it is. Inadvertent bump, and then we get a small package by Saturn. Scott Dickinson says, fuck this, tips Jericho on top of him. 1, 2, 3. Now Saturn must wear a dress, and Jericho slaps Dickinson around and says, hey, go give him the dress. Go give him the sack with the dress. Why was it in a brown sack? Was it covered in drugs? Possibly, based on who booked the show. And Saturn is a bit pissed. I can't imagine why Saturn left the company a year after this. Jericho also, I think after Uncensored 99, because he wasn't on Spring Stampede, I don't think. He was gone, by the summer. He was wrestling mostly on house shows, but I think he was completely out of the company because he wouldn't sign another contract. And then he would have one of the greatest debuts in WWF history. It was WWF at the time, on August 9th, 1999, which was a great moment. It also coincidentally was the moment where Hogan, I believe in Boise, Idaho, or Nampa, Idaho, I think it was Boise, returned to the red and yellow just before Road Wild 99. So, if I actually had time, I would have just completely negated or completely neglected the Raw, the SmackDown, and a lot of that stuff, the new stuff, and just gone through from the debut episode of Nitro and gone all the way through the pay-per-views and just done them in a complete timeline. But honestly, I probably would have gone completely insane by this point, if not by sometime in 98. And the crowd fox whistles at Saturn, and yay, we're going to laugh at the guy in the dress. Virginia, never change. Or Charleston, West Virginia. But nevertheless, no Savage, no Hogan, no Sting, no Bret Hart, no Nash, no Booker, and so on. I mean, a few of those guys did appear, but in a non-wrestling capacity. Billy Kidman versus Ray versus Psychosis versus Hoovy. The Four Corners fatal four-way cruiserweight title match where two guys are in the ring based on a coin flip, and then they must tag out so the other guys can get involved. And Kidman can lose without being pinned. Okay, here's the thing. They should have just done it where they just had all four of these guys go in. That made it messy. No one really cared. They popped for some of the moves, but you could tell by this point that the convoluted method they went about this match got a little bit messy. And this wasn't good. At times it broke down to a tag match because Ray and Kidman had teamed up. Hoovy and Psychosis, part of the LWO that was disbanded because Eddie was fighting for his life currently after a car accident. This wasn't great. There was a double powerbomb outside by the faces that got a pop. There was a dive, but unfortunately this was really starting to drag. Ray didn't sacrifice himself, knocking Psychosis outside. And then Kidman hit the shooting star press, shockingly not hitting his legs on the rope. He was really, really close to doing that. Thankfully he didn't. And got the victory and retained. And Ray held up his hand. Okay. Booker is then having to endure the fact that Mark Madden is within the orbit of this planet and not sent into deep space. And Jericho confronts him. So we're getting a match on Nitro. Rick and David Flair, and David Flair's wrestling debut. David Flair had no business being in a wrestling ring, let me just say. Arn Anderson in the corner are the Flairs. Kurt Hennig and Barry Windham are the opponents. The West Texas Rednecks hadn't happened yet. But, yeah. They had the NWO music, and they didn't think rap was crap yet because No Limit Soldiers were not around, and boy. David Flair, had energy, had enthusiasm, and had a couple decent takedowns, but there were so many moments where David was either having weird expressions or not knowing what the fuck to do. At one point, Barry got tossed in the corner. David got confused. Barry practically had to yell at him to hit him because David was clueless and way out of his element at this point. And Rick got beat down for about 8 minutes of this 14-minute match. By the way, that Norman Smiley Chavo Guerrero match was 2 minutes longer than this. I mean, this was given more time given the beat down that happened afterwards. But yeah, Rick got beat up for a while because they weren't going to leave David in to get the hot tag. And Jesus. Arn gets involved with Kurt. David does nothing because he just literally has no idea what he's fucking doing. It's both hilarious and really sad. It's like watching Eric Watts trying to do shit. And then Kurt gets hit with a low blow and has to sell that forever because David doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. And then Kurt's like, okay, let me slap David around. Let me get him back into this. And Arn Anderson had gotten knocked down, but Arn Anderson got back up again. Ain't nothing going to keep him down. And got a tire iron and hit Kurt Hennig on the back of the neck with it. And then Kurt had to pull David Flair on top of him for the pin. Watch that finish. God damn it, David Flair should have never been in a wrestling ring. 1, 2, 3. And then everybody in the NWO comes down. Remember when the NWO had reformed on the January 4th, 1999 episode, and it was like 8 guys, 7, 8? Yeah, well, unfortunately, they had everybody here. They had Scott Norton. I love Scott Norton, but Scott Norton had a lot more success in New Japan. And Still tough. I still wouldn't mess with it. I mean, I don't know who would mess with the guy. Apparently, he's a really, really nice guy to fans. I haven't met him. But big old thick individual, massive, massive, like, power game. And he's trying to do stuff. Arn's getting beat up, Flair's getting beat up, and Rick's getting beat up, and David Flair's getting beat up. And then Ric Flair gets handcuffed to the goddamn ropes. And then they proceed to whip David Flair for a while. After shoving him around, they whip David Flair. Now, apparently, Rick was not very happy that so many liberties were taken with David. David never complained, and credit to him. I mean, I'm not saying David didn't respect wrestling. He just didn't belong in the ring. But this went on a long time while Hogan kept yelling. They were trying to juice up Hogan and Ric Flair one more time. And then they would face off again at Uncensored 2000. No, really. They kept at this point, WCW's main event scene needed a restart. It needed a restart, a reboot, a refresh. It needed something. Turner should have paid a bunch of money out to a bunch of guys and just let him sit home. Because it was getting dire. But, Rick, not happy about this. David taking the beating. Getting spray painted. There were like 20 guys in the goddamn ring against these three faces. And yes, I know the NWO always had the numbers game. But it worked in 96. It worked in 97. It was sort of working in 98, even though it was stale. It was fucking beyond done by this point. And the fans were beyond done. Even though the ratings would stick around the high 4s or low 5s for, till about March or April, they would tank after that. And this is the big reason why. Because they got tired of the same shit. WWF is doing a lot of stupid shit as well, but Jesus. Anyway, Michael Buffer does his entrances that take about 18 million years because the guy's fucking clueless, when it comes to wrestling at least. He was getting paid like $100,000 per appearance, reportedly. Scott Hall cuts a promo. And rest in peace, Scott Hall, and I know that it was difficult to struggle with substance abuse. I don't think he knew where the fuck he was at. This was sad. He didn't know where he was at all. Goldberg, his career is over. Scott Hall, caused him to piss himself and he slipped in it. So that's it. And then Goldberg makes his entrance, and it's Goldberg versus Scott Hall in a ladder match with a taser up there. Whoever gets the taser and uses it gets the victory. Now, that doesn't mean if you get the taser that you win. You have to get it and use it. That's important. Goldberg had a bad knee, I believe legit. I think he needed some kind of rehab or, minor surgery. Because I don't think he was on Super Brawl 9. I know that he was on Uncensored because he took on Kevin Nash, I believe. I think it was Uncensored or it was Spring Stampede. It was one of the two. But the whole point is, Goldberg really actually did have a legit bad knee. So they had that played in the storyline. Scott Hall was not in a good place here. This is not knocking. He was not. You could physically tell he was limited. He looked like shit. And he wasn't stumbling because he was selling. He was stumbling because he was lost. Scott targets the knee. We get some outside action with the ladder and in the guardrail and some bumps around the ring. Goldberg ends up bleeding pretty badly from the head. Like, there's blood all over the mat. Good thing this is the main event. And the ladder to the back, they took it seriously. I'll give them that much credit. And they really should have had an extra ladder because this ladder is really getting beat up. Scott Hall did hit a nice elbow drop at one point earlier in the match off the ladder. That was good. And then Disco shows up and shoves Goldberg off the ladder, nearly causes him to snap his neck. Because Disco Inferno is a clumsy-ass, stupid motherfucking wrestler that really never deserved to be in wrestling. I mean, he had like maybe 3 good matches and a character that people remember but mostly mock. And then look at the fucker now. He's a Peter Griffin-looking motherfucker, and everybody's going to fucking laugh at him. But at least we can laugh at Peter Griffin. He was a cartoon character. Disco is allegedly a real person. Scott gets the taser, but he can't use it. It gets knocked outside, and then Goldberg limps out there, gets the taser, shocks Disco. It's a shame it wasn't a real taser and that Disco wasn't carted out and had a sheet over him because nobody would have missed him. His own parents probably would have said, oh, thank fuck, that's over. But then they milk Goldberg. They milked Goldberg. Wow, that could have certainly is a different kind of jackhammering right there. Jack off hammering. Let's get to the finish of this. I'm going off the rails. He hits a spear, hits a jackhammer, and shocks Scott Hall with the taser. And we literally have maybe a minute left, and then Bam Bam shows up and attacks Goldberg, because we're going to continue that. You know, now that I think about it, actually, I think Goldberg might have actually faced Bam Bam at Super Brawl and was just fighting through these knee issues, because I don't think there's any way he would have had any kind of minor surgery and been able to come back. But, yeah, Goldberg really did have a bad knee, and that was from playing football. And also, look, as much as I knock Goldberg and I hate the fact he ended Bret Hart's career inadvertently or whatever, Goldberg did have a hard, impactful style that would offer wear and tear on anyone's body. Even somebody that was like a Clydesdale horse, as Bret Hart said when referring to Goldberg. But Bam Bam attacks him, and then Scott Hall shocks Bam Bam and shocks Goldberg and does this, and this feud is not over. This show's over, though. This pay-per-view is over, thank fuck. The main event was fine, but did offer the usual shenanigans and bullshit, and it was obvious after the peak with Super Brawl 9. I still will never understand why that card got 485,000 pay-per-view buys and was either the second or at least in the top 5 of most bought pay-per-views ever in WCW history. This was not good. This was not a good pay-per-view at all, and that's why I decided to go into a little more depth and a little more snark and joking, because why not? So, agree, disagree with what I said? Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Rentlin. I'll see you soon.